the ideal menstruating body that we've seen is white, tiny, skinny, able-bodied, you know, and yeah, it can do everything. Wants to do cartwheels and shit
Right.
when they're on their period. So
Hello and welcome. You are now tuned into the Ebb and Flow podcast. I'm your host, LA-based actor, model, and poet Ebony Davis. Today, we are speaking to someone who's working to dismantle systems that affect half the population. And I would argue that they, in fact, affect all of the population because there's no liberation for men without women, and there's no liberation for women without men. In the spirit of reworking our socialization and getting to know ourselves better, today I'll be talking with Chelsea VonChaz. She is an educator, she's an advocate, and she's the founder of Happy Period, an organization dedicated to education around menstrual health and access. Thank you so much for joining us, Chelsea.
thanks for having me.
Yes,
I'm
it's my
excited for
pleasure.
you.
You're excited for me?
Yes.
Why are you excited for me?
Because this is something that you're starting, and you seem I know you're very passionate about it. I can see you just from you having these great conversations, just personally, professionally with your following, and now you have your own platform to do it. So no, it just makes sense. So why not? I'm really happy for you. Yeah.
Well, thank you. I thank you so much for joining us. It's as soon as I sort of got the dates aligned for starting the podcast, you were someone that I wanted to reach out to right away. Like from the time that I met you, I just thought the work that you did was extremely important. And I think the work that you do relates to my own story and how I started menstruating and what that process was like. And I know there's just so much education for young women and young men too that is to be had. So I would love for you to talk about how you started this organization and why.
My journey with periods started when I got my period, and the fact that I had this tribe or a village more so of just amazing women that supported me before I got my period, and then when it came, and then following. I got the period talk from my mama, my grandmamas, both grandmamas, my aunties, cousins, and it was pretty just, fluid, and they cracked jokes. They shared about their period, why they hated it, that I was probably going to hate it, but it's just something that was going to happen. And then I had Miss Jackson, my 5th grade teacher. She gave us the period talk, like, as students in class. She even had a drawer in her desk that was full of pads, and she gave us permission to go on her desk to, like, grab one.
Wow.
So I just had a support system. So for real, my whole, I guess, relationship with menstruation started from then, and just shaping how I view menstruation and how I want others to have the same freedom and just support system that I did, right? Initially, the idea to start Happy Period came to me when I was in LA driving in between gigs, and I was driving and stopped at a red light, and I saw a black woman who I then did assume to be houseless, but she crossed the street, and I could see, like, a period stain on the back of her butt. And so that just really made me mad, because it's broad-ass daylight. We're in L.A. and Hollywood, not too far from the Grove. So, and kind of in this very high-traffic area. And it just really upset me. But it had me thinking, though, like, damn, if you are houseless, you're living on the street, and you get your period, where do you go? What resources do you have? I've witnessed several times just being in kind of like cafes where I see people who are trying to come in to use the bathroom. They're not allowed to use the restrooms.
Right.
And honestly, like, from there, I just kind of thought about myself, like putting me in her shoes as far as my experience with my period, because at that time I already knew I had fibroids. They weren't necessarily bothering me extremely at that time. However, I just knew that I was dealing with them, and I knew how to manage them, and I knew, like, okay, when my period comes, I have to make sure that I take a pause, because if I don't, it's really going to be a bad experience, because sometimes I would be nauseous on my period. Sometimes I would be just cramping to the point where I'm in the fetal position. So I'm like, yo, if I had my experience like that, and I'm living on the street, like, I probably would have a really bad sense or an unhealthy self-esteem. I may even have an unhealthy level with my mental health. I may even, just feel like I'm worthless, or I don't want to be here, or I don't like being in this body. So honestly, after that, I did do some research. I reached out to shelters, and it didn't make it no better, but I'm still glad that I did, because the answers that I got from a lot of the reps was, that we're aware that this is an issue, but we don't, we're not required to allocate any part of our budget to take care of just period products. Like, we have other things to worry about. So we are relying on donations, and most people don't donate because they're thinking about, canned goods and Thanksgiving type items, the weather, if they need socks or blankets. And I'm like, damn, this is horrible. In my mind, I was like, if I don't do this, it's going to get bad. I didn't know that I was the only Black organization at the time that was doing that, as far as catering specifically to vulnerable communities of color, specifically dealing with periods and cycle care and education and access. I didn't know that I was the first Black one, but it really didn't matter, because in my mind, thank you. The rep that I did talk to that worked at this shelter in LA, I won't say which shelter because I won't shade sis. I'm happy that she answered my phone call. I'm happy that she told me she was for real. She basically said, when we have someone come in and they're clearly in need of a pad or a tampon, 9 times out of 10, one of us is going in our purses to give it to them, because there's nothing in the pantry. They're layered in clothes. Their clothes are soiled. They sometimes use it as a tactic to keep someone from sexually attacking them. Because they're hoping that they have a smell, or they're using it as a way to just be able to stay away, or for people to stay away from them. And I'm like, this is horrible. It really shouldn't be like this, and people don't really know how deep it is. I mean, shout out to her, because she, felt my passion, but she gave me her anger, because she did have a bit of an attitude with me on the phone, just kind of breaking it all down. So I told my mama about it, and she was like, well, what are we going to do?
Yeah.
Well, what are we going to do? I'm like, I guess we'll create this to be like a project or something. Because at that time, I was thinking little. Man, the universe, the ancestors, they have a way of telling you what to do and making you do certain things. And if you don't be listening, it's like, wait a minute, now you're doing this to yourself.
Right.
So their way of making sure that I was tapped into my purpose was that as soon as I shifted to working on happy period, so many things just fell out of the sky that I didn't even ask for initially. Like press and media placements, volunteers, amazing volunteers. Some of the volunteers that I had in my first year, like, they're now my homegirls, like my friends.
Incredible.
And traveling and meeting so many amazing people who also wanted to create charities and do something for their community. And I'm just a big ball of information. I don't believe in just like, oh, no, you can't do what I do because this is what no, it's like, no, let me tell you what I did so you don't make the same mistakes.
Right.
Let me show you the way, and you have your own experience. So it happened so quickly, and it grew so fast. So here we are. Now we're focused on education and access. So we are beyond distributing period products. More so now we're about creating curriculums and guides and spaces for people to just freely talk about their period for the sake of them having, gaining some type of empowerment when it comes to body literacy. So them knowing what their menstrual cycle is, the entire cycle, being able to name certain body parts and not feel weird about it, and also understanding that they have all of these options when it comes to period products, and it's their choice what period products actually work for them, and what's better for their body and their butt. It's not cheap.
Absolutely.
It's not free. So yeah, but here we are.
Amazing.
Never knew.
Yes. So you spoke about your period being talked about in such a positive way, and you had this village of women around you. How is that different from some of the girls that you educate or mentor on period literacy?
But I'm pretty sure I got the period talk initially from my mother, and then both grandmamas, and aunties and cousins followed. And then my 5th grade teacher, Miss Jackson, she actually gave her students, all her female students, a period talk one day in class. I do remember that. And she was pretty awesome. She had we had like a special hand signal to when we raised our hands to let her know, like, hey, I need to go to the restroom, like for this specific reason. And then she also allowed us to go in her desk to grab a pad because she had a drawer in her desk that was just pads. So, that was pretty cool. I had a village, and I think that's the reason why I have my own special relationship with menstruation. Like my whole journey with it started then at age 10 when I experienced menarche because of the support group that I had. You know, everybody just kind of talked about their period very calmly and made it relatable, made fun of it, made fun of me. It was supportive, so I'm really grateful. Creating these spaces where we do these like period pop-ups where we're talking to them about their cycles, like from the beginning, we're talking to them about puberty, you know what I mean? And letting them know, you know, I tell them about my period, so I try to make it as relatable as possible, giving them the encouragement to even simply look at themselves because, a lot of them are in spaces or homes or communities where they're still not even sure if their body is theirs. And that's something that's not their fault because we as Black women have historically been told and taught and pushed to feel as if, or even to be programmed that our body is not our own, that we don't belong to ourselves and our body's not as worthy or valuable. And, you know, and we're taught to not survive. So it's like, why would someone teach you how to look at your period as a vital sign and to really understand what's going on with your body, you know? So some of them are, you know, just right out the gate ashamed about their period.
Absolutely.
And, you know, feel like, oh, I hate it. This is horrible. Why? Yeah. What happens to the boys? Why don't the boys have anything? Right. And, you know, and just feel kind of uncomfortable in their own body, right? Just even at 10 or 12 years old. And I just really want to be a part of just be the catalyst for that to shift or change to where we're not in that space of even feeling like just you know what I mean?
I think for me personally, when I started my period, it felt like a burden. And, you know, it was because I was coming from a family that just didn't have a lot of extra money. I was raised by my father. I had 2 younger brothers. So for me to be the only woman in the house who had this extra need, it felt like almost selfish, or it felt like I was taking something from my family because I had this extra expense, you know, to have the products that I needed to care for myself. And so there was definitely a lot of shame and hiding and just not wanting to speak up about it because I knew that my dad was already under a lot of stress with the bills that already existed. So this added thing I knew would just put more pressure on him. You spoke about being on your period and you know that you have to take a break. You know that you have to unplug. You know that you have to take time for yourself. But then you see these commercials and these girls are doing all these sports and gymnastics and doing backflips and just, you know, they're playing soccer and they're doing the most. And the way our period is kind of marketed, or the way that products are marketed, is this will help you keep up with the pace of your life as it is. This will help you keep up with capitalism and do your job and go above and beyond. Would you say that marketing just like not in alignment with our natural flow and the things that our bodies need during our cycle?
Well, first of all, it's definitely not inclusive. So they're not showing everyone's experience.
Right.
I'm talking about the folks that have PCOS, the folks that have endometriosis, folks that's dealing with fibroids. And yes, and the girls that are, you know, just favored by God herself and don't have not one cramp ever. No bloat, no nausea, no nothing. Yeah. So, I think that's the first problem right there.
Yeah.
And also kind of this weird push that, you know, having a period is luxurious. And also kind of minimizing the experience of it being about self-care or it being about a pause and resting. I think that's been completely erased low-key. When it comes to my experience, I think about how I'm aware of the red tent in indigenous communities because that's my family. So aware that women used to have their period and do absolutely nothing. And were encouraged to do nothing unless they wanted to, and that meant not being forced to not cook or clean or do housework, but just having the choice to just simply rest because the community and society respects the fact that you yourself have this different connection with God, and you are God yourself, and you can create life in a way that needs all of the support that we can gather for you, right? And that was just a space for them to be, just a sacred space for them to just simply be, and even like pouring their blood back into the earth, all of these beautiful traditions and rituals. Like, we've kind of lost that. And no, I don't see that in marketing whatsoever.
Right.
Because it's also because it's so whitewashed, right? Like the ideal menstruating body that we've seen is white, tiny, skinny, able-bodied, and it can do everything, wants to do cartwheels and shit when they're on their period. So it's not realistic, but hey, it may be someone's experience, sure. I just don't think it's inclusive, and it's not realistic, and it erases too much of folks that have a real experience. There's over 5 million women in America right now that have PCOS or have been diagnosed with PCOS. There's a large group that haven't yet to be diagnosed. Over 80% of Black women, African American women specifically, here in the U.S. will have developed fibroids by the age of 50. So I have not seen not one damn commercial that is showing cis giving birth to a jellyfish. That's low key, also a blood clot. You know what I mean? Like that's the term for large blood clots, by the way. We say, I've given birth to a jellyfish because that's literally how it feels when you're bleeding so much to the point where your clots are much larger, where you can pick them up or you really feel the difference. And it's like, yo, what is this? And that's could be the cause of a fibroid. So they lie.
So this is sort of a 2-part question.
Okay.
I've had my own experiences with going to a doctor's office with terrible, painful periods, violent periods, crying, throwing up, nausea, just crippling, can't leave the house, can't do anything. But I've realized through my own spiritual journey that I hold a lot of my emotions in my uterus.
I mean, your womb.
Yes, in my womb. I realized that as a child, every time I had an unexpressed emotion, it went there. Every time I had an unmet need, it went there. Every time I had a unaddressed trauma, it went there. And so I've been able to help alleviate some of that cramping and some of that pain and some of the violence of those periods by kind of going back and remembering those emotions, unpacking them, and also speaking to my womb, acknowledging when that physical pain comes up that the source of it is emotional, and saying, hey, I hear you, I feel you, I'm here, you're heard, you're felt, you're seen. What has your spiritual journey been like in relationship to your period, and also in those circumstances when you go to the doctor, or when any woman goes to the doctor, particularly Black women, because we have to deal with this Black women are so strong stereotype, and often we're not given the care that we need. How do we advocate for ourselves in those situations?
I love this question. The spiritual journey that I've had with menstruation has been from menarche, age 10, to now a couple weeks shy from turning 34. It has been educational. It's been encouraging. It's been magical in a way where I have learned a lot about myself through my period. It's helped me trust myself and listen to my body specifically, because I truly believe that your period is a vital sign. It will tell you a lot of information if you listen to it, if you pay attention. And what that looks like, to give example, is just simply pausing and stopping to check out your blood. Like, what does your flow look like? What's the color? How heavy is it? How long is it? Is it sticking around? Is it 4 days, 5 days, 7 days? Is it more than 10 days? And also, what are you feeling when your period is coming? Are you automatically feeling sick or nauseous? Is it a headache? Is it a bloat? How are you feeling emotionally? What's the mood giving? Is it giving, I don't feel like being bothered by no man, get away from me, but give me some chocolate and I might smile? Is it feeling like, I guess I like to match it up with seasons. spring, summer, fall, winter. For me, my period is definitely winter. Don't touch me. Leave me alone. I'm hibernating. I'll be back outside when it gets a little warmer. Yeah. And I'm thinking about the entire cycle: ovulation, luteal, follicular phases, and then menstruation. How am I having this experience that is probably teaching me something? Like, what am I learning? Because there's so much that we're doing when we're just living life, but we're also expected to even continue doing too much when we're bleeding, right?
Yeah.
We're expected to smile, to show up at work, to travel, to take care of babies, to take care of other people, and to be quiet about our period. And that's just, it's not fair. And I really respect you for sharing how you learned that you were holding a lot of things in, and you noticed how it was just be stuck in your womb. Yeah. And I'm pretty sure there's millions of other Black women that feel the same way.
So many I've talked to.
And I think low key we're all kind of synced up in that way, because there's shame, there's the stigma with menstruation. So we're already silenced for having a period, and we're not even supported in our period. We can barely go in a public restroom. In the airport or a restaurant, there's toilet paper there, but there's no free tampons, there's no free pads, there's not even no free Motrin or Midol, nothing.
Right.
And, but yet we're expected to bleed and to continue to perpetuate humanity. Like, that's legit an expectation. For me, it's all of those words that I named where I've tapped into, and I can also say that it's been painful too. However, through that pain, I learned the most, which brings me into the second part of the question: how do you advocate for yourself? You really have to speak up. We really can't be tapping into the fear that everybody has over us. Yeah. So, like, for example, angry Black woman stereotype, right? Yeah. Honey, I say, well, honey, if they scared of you anyway, if they fear you anyway, they
give them a reason.
Go ahead, okay? Go ahead. Let them know you are not to be fucked with.
Period.
At all. On a serious note, though, because I have been that woman to go to the emergency room, go to urgent care, and feeling just excruciating pain, tired of switching out my menstrual cup, bled through my period panties, soaking through these pads, like, Lord. Yeah. And just super frustrated. And I was like, all right, they gonna listen to me and up this the date for this surgery, because this is when right before I had a fibroid surgery. So I got one fibroid removed, and I'm really happy that I did this, because even though I had already made lifestyle changes with getting rid of dairy and sugar and stop drinking and smoking. I'm almost 1 year sober. Even though I made all these changes, I still decided to go ahead and have a surgery, because I started thinking about fertility and just in the future of, like, how I want to have that experience of creating life. But the last time I went to the ER, I went up to that front desk nurse, and, they say, well, what brings you in today? Or why are you here? And it's like, that's the most gaslighting fucking question.
Right. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But anyway, I'm hemorrhaging. And then they said, where? I said, my vagina. Mm-hmm. I change my pads every 15 to 30 minutes. Wow. I need to lay down. I need to see a doctor immediately, because I'm bleeding even as I'm talking to you. Wow. And I said it very calmly. Honey, I went from, the level of service and urgency went from 0 to 12. And it just really shook me, but also I just kind of figured, like, that was going to be the case. And this was something that I teach other people to do. So for me to have to do it and to just see it in real time, it was just like, this is interesting, but let's just see how this goes. Unfortunately, with that time, they had already scheduled my surgery, and they didn't make it any sooner. But it did give me some time to continue doing what I was doing, which was, juicing and fasting in the mornings. And I noticed when I was juicing and fasting on certain days that the bleeding actually would lighten up a whole lot. And also, I wasn't on any medication. Like, I didn't do birth control. I still don't do birth control. I low-key think, like, birth control pills are kind of the reason why we're in this situation in the first place when it comes to fibroids and PCOS, endometriosis. But I'm no doctor, no scientist, so.
But you know your stuff.
Yeah, it's my experience, you know.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Me saying this, I want the person who has the power and the access to make these studies happen. I want them to do something about it, you know, prove me wrong or tap into what I'm saying, because this is a problem. Honey, if fibroids was growing out of males' ball sacks.
Right. We would have the answer. We would have the answers yesterday.
And I hate to even use that as an example, but it's like, y'all, come on now. Like, it's true. Like, and y'all don't even like going to the doctor. So how would y'all feel having to go to OBGYN once a year, or some of us like once every 3 to 6 months, and have to perform a pap smear? Yeah. It's so uncomfortable. And my fibroids were so bad to where even pap smears were like painful. Yeah. Sex too sometimes, honestly. So yeah, it's the language, hemorrhaging, showing them or telling them your level of pain from 0 to 10, saying 11 and 12. Going from, you know, breaking down how many pads you're changing, or how the time frame between the pads you're changing in the menstrual cups or tampons or whatever that you're using. Maybe even low-key showing up and having like a long cardigan or something on and say, hey, do you see this? I've messed up my clothes. You know what I mean? Right. Like, and it's, which I've also done that before too. I remember one time I ordered some Postmates and I could not go downstairs because my period played in my face at my front door. I was like, and I texted him, I was like, you're going to have to come inside, honey, and put that to my front door. And I was like, this is insane. And I would take photos, you know, and video, like people see on my Instagram. Like, you know, it's not about it me being gross or just trying to make it like where I want to just show all these, just show everything. It's about awareness. Yeah. It's about the fact that, you know, I know there's millions of other women that are dealing with this. And this is my way of being an advocate for myself and everybody else. Yeah. So you can't be afraid to speak up for yourself and say what is your pain.
Yeah. Know? Yeah, I think that's so important. And I think the gaslighting can be the hardest part to deal with, because in my experience, it was like I went to the doctor, I told her I was in severe pain, and she's like, well, if you can take a Tylenol, then you're fine. Yeah. You know, and upon further investigation, there was something there. And so I think it's so important that we do have this language to be able to advocate for ourselves and be taken seriously. And also just within the medical system, I think there has to be a general understanding of trauma and how that manifests in our bodies. And I don't think there is, particularly as descendants of enslaved people. You know, our sexuality and sex as a whole was weaponized and used against us as a tool for control. And we hold all of that in our wombs. And now it's like every Black woman I talk to has some physical manifestation of that emotional patterning, of that emotional wounding, of that trauma. Yeah. And it's like, how do we overcome that? How do we have conversations about that if when we look at the television, we see white women playing soccer? Yeah. You know, on their periods.
And one last note, like, I really want Black women to start doing this and to just understand you are your own data scientist. Start a period journal. That's something that I have. Okay. And I'm talking more and more about it because, you know, I hear like you're talking about other people's experiences that you know. Yeah. And yes, we're being gaslit. As soon as we come into the exam room, we don't want folks to just say, oh, this is anecdotal or whatever. So collect the data, you know, mark your experiences with your period. Take photos, videos, you know, track your period a bit more extremely, you know, beyond just an app. Really write these things down and notate what's different, what has changed in your mood, mentally, physically, what's different from 3 months ago, 6 months ago, last year. Also, when you're going into these doctor's offices, turn on the recording, record the conversation. Wow. Put the phone in your purse if you don't want to just have it the phone face up.
Yeah.
But start recording your examinations if you can. And I get it, like, some doctors don't want to be recorded. That's why I'm like, okay, well, you just need the audio, sis.
Yeah.
Just in case something goes down, And also, you don't have to keep these doctors. Like, if you have one experience with a doctor and you feel like he or she or they are not listening to you, they're not taking you seriously, you can let them know, like, hey, I would like to have another doctor. You can report. There's always someone that for you to be able to report to say, hey, I had a bad experience, or I don't feel comfortable with this doctor, the way that they touched me, the way that they talk to me. You are the patient. You actually hold majority of the power. So I don't want folks to really kind of feel like they have to just accept what's given to you because of how the healthcare system is, the fact that it's not free, it's not universal. It is messed up. However, I really want folks to just tap into owning their power and being an advocate so they can learn how to navigate the system, because this is what it is right now. So, yeah.
What's advice that you would give to parents of menstruating young people or young people who are about to start their menstrual cycle to help, give them the education that they need? How can a parent approach that conversation, even if they may have not had that conversation themselves and they don't necessarily feel comfortable?
Yeah. I think there's a couple different things that folks can do, because I don't think there's just like this one like best way to do it, because it is a kind of a tough conversation, but it also can be a liberating conversation too. It can be funny. So I think you can tap into your personality and also with your child's personality. I've taught a child as young as 4 years old about periods, and the child is a boy, and he got it right off the bat. And to me, it was just funny because of his personality. He's like, oh, so you're not bleeding from your butt. Got it. Got it. Like, no, oh my God.
That reminds me of that viral video that was like the little boy in the grocery store, and he grabs pads and he brings them to his mom's car, and he's like, I got these for your butt.
These are for your butt. You don't want this for your butt? It's not
you don't want these for your butt?
It's like, oh my God, I love it.
Well, I mean, speaking of that, how important is this education also for young men and boys?
Oh my goodness. To me, it's just as important, because they need to understand how they got here and where they come from.
Yes.
And how there is a huge possibility, and they also have the chance to create another life when they get older.
Yeah.
So I think feeding into them, pouring into them now with that information would hugely contribute to the man or whoever they become later on, just because they have that knowledge and they don't feel this dissociation to the female body, like, oh, this is your problem, that's what you deal with, that's on you. So I think it's super important to talk to males, young boys, about this conversation. I also think it's important to just include everybody, gender expansive folks, non-binary folks,
absolutely,
and let them have their own space to just talk about their experiences. Because me personally, as a cishet Black woman, I don't see too much of them having the space to talk.
Yeah. And
I don't like that. So I like to mention it so I can encourage them in my way to take up their space to talk about it, because I don't see them being shown enough either. For parents though, I would love for them to make it as relatable as they can, like talk about their period first, and then let the child know, like, they're next. It can happen. It might happen to you this year, next year, 5 years from now, and that everybody's different. And also, like, if it really like bothers them and makes them uncomfortable to where they may have anxiety or something, I wouldn't want them to be triggered. So I would highly recommend for them to reach out or tap into someone who could assist them with that, whether that is a pediatrician, whether that's another educator who is focused on menstrual equity or menstruation or body literacy, grandma, auntie, just say, hey, I think we should, we have to tell them, how do we have this talk? I need some support. So yeah, I had a village. So I think the village route is the best, because the child will have all these different personalities and people pouring information into them. Right. And then they'll be able to kind of like gather their own experience or their ideas. Like, all right, cool. It doesn't feel like it's something that's horrible.
Yeah.
But it's also, it may not be scary, even though
Right.
it could, it is a little bit. I think it actually could be pretty scary because it's hard. It's really hard to explain to an 8 or a 9-year-old, this is what's going to happen to your body on a monthly basis. Once it starts, it's going to start whenever it feels like starting. There's no like set date. It's just going to happen. It's just going to happen. And then it's going to be like that till you're about 55, 56.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, why? I did a workshop with some third graders, and at the end, one of the students, she was like, Miss Chelsea, I just don't think I'm not going to do it. This period thing, I'm just not going to do it. Is there a way for me to not do it? I think I don't want to do this. It's just too much. I'm sure there's a way to not do this. I'm like, oh my God. I wasn't going to. Now, if she was one of my relatives, and I felt like, she later on, I would explain how there are options and there are things that could happen to the body where they actually may not happen. Like women who have adenomyosis, and then some folks who have menorrhagia, and some people who do not have the quote unquote normal period where they just bleed randomly. I definitely would have poured that into her a little bit if she was one of my relatives. But I kind of smiled and laughed, and I said, hey, it's not a horrible thing. It's not a bad thing. It's actually pretty magical because your body is rejuvenating itself.
Yes.
And it's forming, it's cleansing and building itself up. Like, you're literally a bit of a superhero on the inside. And yes, this physical thing happens with the blood. I was like, but it won't always be painful, and it won't always be weird, like how it sounds weird right now. And she was like, all right.
Yeah, I think, her resistance toward it kind of speaks to, like, the shame around it all. Yes. And I think that's really unfortunate. But I think, like you said, if we can kind of make this a universal conversation where everyone is included, then we can kind of eliminate that shame and just move into a different way of being when it comes to dealing with our periods. So how can those who already bleed practice better health and educate themselves?
Ooh, journaling.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah, that's my first initial answer, journaling. Tracking your period beyond just an app, though. So really marking the dates of when your period started, how long is, the duration of it, what issues you're having with your period, if there are any crazy symptoms, like really marking the symptoms, your mental health, your mood, any pains that you might have. Did you have sex during your period at some point? And also just checking out your flow. I feel like we're kind of disconnected with our period because of the grossness when it comes to just really looking at our flow and accepting, like, all right, I'm bleeding. What else can I learn from my flow? So like how thick is it? If it's watery, what are the colors? Oh man, there's just so much you can learn about your period just from actually looking at it and tracking it, and just keeping some type of journal.
Are there specific period products that you recommend that would allow us to track our health better?
I like to talk about stylizing your period, just in a very similar way in how you stylize your hair with certain products that you like to use. You have a specific type of edge control. You might have something that you like to use when wrapping your hair late at night.
Right.
Same thing with your makeup, specific, eyeliner, blush, foundation. Same thing with your period. Period panties, I think, are really great to use, especially for someone that wants to just kind of have a comfortable flow at night or at bedtime. I think Black women, we could use the experience of what it feels like to just flow or to free bleed, which is basically just not having a pad or a tampon in and just bleeding. You're able to have that experience with period panties because you just put on a pair of panties and you're good to go. So if you're uncomfortable wearing period panties just by themselves in public, then I would say just wear them at night or at bedtime.
Yeah.
Or if you're like me, during the day, you're not going nowhere on your period, I'm just bleeding in my period panties all day.
Yeah.
I love honey pot company products. I think her pads are amazing, especially for someone who deals with like mild cramping in the first 24 hours of the flow, and bloating for sure. It's really good. If you're into essential oils, I would highly recommend tapping into essential oils like lemongrass, eucalyptus, and putting the oil like on your wrist. I think that helps with folks, wanting to kind of have more of to soothe themselves or getting ready for bed. If you're taking naps throughout your period, then I think that helps. It does wonders for me. So I would recommend that, especially to just relax yourself, because I feel like a lot of us tense when we're on our period, especially when we're cramping. Ruby Love is one Black-owned period panty company that is amazing. Shout out to her because she's been holding it down for the girls for some years.
Oh, yeah.
Herbs, Dong Quai.
Yep.
Raspberry leaf. Chash tree berry. I cannot stress enough how these herbs are so important. Yeah. You're flowing from top to bottom and being able to go to the bathroom. So that's why I always recommend like ginger teas. If you want to give yourself like a break from all the raspberry or berry flavored things. Period poops with me are not cute whatsoever. But I know that's a real thing for a lot of people with periods, where it's a lot of stress and things are happening with constipation and all that. So I always recommend like, hey, make sure you're drinking your teas, whatever tea you feel most comfortable with, that puts you in a good mood. But definitely if you could tap into some herbs like Dong Quai, black cohosh, like highly recommend those for sure. Period sex. How do you feel about it?
I think for me, my period is a sacred time for me to connect with my own body. And I think it's not just a physical process, but a spiritual process of letting go of all of the emotions that don't serve me, all of the unexpressed feelings that I had that I wasn't able to express. And so outside of just the physical aspects of it, I don't want to release my emotions onto my partner that are no longer serving me. And so for me, period sex isn't a thing that I partake in.
I love it. I don't partake in it just because I don't feel like being bothered.
Yeah. I feel that. Yeah.
I really don't. And excuse me for at first asking if you're in a relationship, but I have just noticed with people who are like couples or in relationships, I love to ask that question because I always want to know what the experience is like for both partners. But if your partner is ever supportive of you when it comes to your time of the month.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. And I think that's so important and worth addressing as well, is that it's important that your partner respects whatever decision you make. If you decide that having sex on your period is in alignment with you, then that's fine. But if you decide that it's not, then you shouldn't be dealing with somebody who pressures you into having sex during that time of the month, knowing how sacred it is to you, if it's something that you're not comfortable with.
Absolutely.
So I think that's definitely worth just, taking note of.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And having that conversation, just understanding what you like personally, and what you're down for. Are you down for day 1, day 2, period sex, day 3? There's a difference.
Yeah.
If you are just completely off limits like me, or even sometimes, you might have a change of heart just based on what your period experience was like that month. Maybe it wasn't so aggressive. Maybe there weren't a lot of symptoms all over the place.
Yeah.
And maybe, the hormones kind of built back up a little faster around day 5, where it's like, ooh, I might be spotting, but you know what, let's just go for it. Let's just see what happens.
I mean, I think what you said about just education for men is so important too, because then as a woman, if I don't want to, have sex on my period and I communicate that to my partner, there will be a respect.
Absolutely.
It won't be this like, this is what I want, because there'll be a general understanding.
Yes. Listen, last thing, I don't want to practice monogamy right now. However, with my homegirls, when they go out on dates looking for a boyfriend, I always tell them, be on your period, sis, when you go on your dates. Or like kind of throw that into the conversation, and you will be able to see what their maturity level is like.
Wow.
And that's a really good way to, tap into like how they feel about feminist issues, womanist issues,
Yes.
and also what they're comfortable with, within
Right.
themselves. It'll tell you
Yeah.
a lot about them. So I'm
Yeah.
like, even if you're not bleeding, sis, be on your period.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me.
Absolutely,
It's
this
been
was
such
great.
a pleasure. I've learned a lot, and so I know the people watching are going to also learn a lot. And yeah, I just thank you so much for being here and giving
Thank
us your
you.
time and your words.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.